So my name is Eva Rodriguez. I'm the president of Career Connections this year, and I'm really excited because this is our first in-person gathering and function because last year, of course, we were all virtual, and I could not think of a better group of women to do it with. But today, we are with Vox Media, which was founded in 2011, and I'm sure Jackie and these panelists will go into more details, but we have 5 panelists of women who have really achieved so much in their careers. But what I find super interesting is that all of them had different paths to get to where they are today, which is something that we don't really think about, and I hope to learn more about. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eva. So hi, and we are so excited to be here. And I know it's been an incredibly challenging year for all of you, and getting through the pandemic, and I'm sure applying to schools or just having to do school remotely at points. So we just want to say we're here with you. We have faced those challenges, and these women here are here to tell you that bonding together and relying on each other is really a way that you can achieve anything. So as Eva said, we're from Vox Media, and it's a media company you may be familiar with. We publish websites like The Cut, like Vulture, Eater, The Verge, Vox.com. We also have a podcast studio that has a lot of popular podcasts. We have a studio that produces shows for Netflix, for HBO, for Hulu. And we have various different divisions who develop digital products. So how you see our websites come to life, we have teams who actually design that stuff. So at a company like Vox Media, there are really a lot of careers, and you don't have to come to it one way. I happen to be head up the marketing department and the comms departments, and what I do is I bring together teams to tell both consumers about Vox Media. So when we have an event like Vulture Festival, which we just produced at the Hollywood Roosevelt this weekend, we market it to them, we tell them to come, we engage them. But I also talk to advertisers and clients who might want to partner with us in different ways. So it's a really interesting career path. I did not come to it knowing that I was going to do this. I was an English major in college, and I decided I really liked the business and creative kind of aspect of things. So I worked at an ad agency for the first half of my career, and then slowly moved over to publishing and eventually digital publishing. So that's kind of how I got there. And this is Abby Aronofsky, and she has a completely different career path. I'm going to let her introduce herself and talk about it for a second.
Hi, I'm Abby. I went to NYU where I studied print journalism, which was an actual major that existed a really long time ago. And ironically, I did end up almost 20 years later back in a company that does have a print magazine, which makes me very happy. But since graduating from college, I've taken detours into politics, ad agencies. I also did some consulting for nonprofits. And so I have kind of a roundabout path that brought me first into media and then back into media. And I also got a master's degree in international business, which I'm not using, but maybe I will someday. So you never know what's going to happen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tara. I also had a little bit of an interesting path. I went to Emerson College I got a bachelor in media arts, which I did not know at the time what that even meant. What I studied was TV, film, video, and kind of all the things that I personally loved. And I think that that's ultimately the way my path went. I now do events and experiential for Vox Media. I just produced Vulture Festival, which ultimately I followed my own interests through my career. So I started in music video production because I really like music, but I'm not musically talented at all. And so I found a way to get in there. And then I moved into commercial and TV production. And then ultimately I was like, I really like food a lot. So I did some food events and a lot of things with like celebrity chefs and producing events in that way. And then found my way into big scale events and Vox Media, where I took my media arts degree and applied it in a way that I didn't even know was possible. So ultimately it's finding what you're really good at and what you really love, and being passionate about what you do is how I found my path.
Hi. Yep. Hi, I'm Charlene. I work on the advertising sales side at Vox Media, and I started my career, I majored in business fashion, so I loved fashion. That was my passion. But I started my career in beauty at Avon, and working at corporate, working on the sales and marketing team, and then I actually kind of transitioned into media through fashion. I was passionate about a fashion brand, you might have heard of them, Refinery 29, and I started there, and then really kind of got, exposed to meet the media side and advertising side, and so really started in media there, and then transitioned to Vox Media, where I want to kind of expand my media set into a portfolio company, which is why Vox is so great. But to Tara's point, following passion and kind of untraditional routes to getting you here is very normal. I think that's the thing that she touches on, is having kind of your North Star of what you like in a job and a career, and then kind of letting things come to you, or keeping your eyes and ears open for what's out there as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Paulina, and I am a coordinator on the experiential team under the wonderful Tara and Jackie. So I kind of got my start in the business. During college, I worked for 3 years at a finance institution, so I kind of thought finance was my passion, but I realized that I wanted to have a more creative side, so I started to major in marketing, and then right out of college, I started at Vox Media. So I am pretty new, I'm very young to the company, but I just really wanted a more creative edge, and having connections with Jackie, who I spammed multiple times during the pandemic for, hey, do you have any more opportunities or internships? And thankfully she had something for me, and I am just so grateful, but yeah.
Don't pass it.
From very non-traditional backgrounds. We didn't know that these jobs existed. And, it is still a challenge every day to sometimes be a woman in this business, because while it's very progressive and it's very much open to a lot of opportunities, I think that we've all faced interesting things and interesting challenges. When I first started, definitely being in a meeting and having a voice as a woman was tough. You had to assert yourself. You had to be an advocate. But I also found many women who were in the same situation, and how we all worked together. And I think that's something that this team does a lot. As I said earlier, they support each other. And we've become great friends, because I think that's also important when you're working a lot of your days. So, we're really real with each other, and I'm going to ask each of them to talk about things like, what's a challenge they face on a day-to-day basis? Like, how do they think about it? How do they stay motivated, especially since the last 18 months made it incredibly tough? But what's a challenge you face, Abby, or what trips you up in the morning?
A lot. I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, so the challenges I face in the morning are getting them out of the house. But work-wise, a challenge I face is that there are a lot of media brands out there, a lot of media companies, and I didn't mention this, but I'm a senior brand strategy director. So my role is in telling the story of Vox Media, of who we are, to advertisers, to make them want to spend money with us. And whether that's, buying advertising on our site or in our magazine, or sponsoring big events like Vulture Festival, which Tara just produced. And part of my job and my challenge is saying, well, how is Eater different from the other food sites, from The Infatuation? How is The Cut different from Refinery 29 and Vogue.com? Because if you don't dig into it, you might think that they're pretty much all the same. So I'm lucky in that it's a little bit less of a challenge for Vox Media, which I think has some of the greatest journalists working for us. And I think the level of representation and inclusivity in our storytelling is unmatched. There's still, unfortunately, a lot of bad behavior that you'll see in the media landscape among other publishers, whether that's just reinforcing stereotypes or just working with other partners in ways that aren't ethical. And I'm really proud to say that at Vox Media, we're pretty much the gold standard. And it shows because the content is the best. It's fun. When I started, I was asked, why I wanted to come to Vox Media. And I said, it's because I'm a real, in-person fan of all of these brands. Like, I read these on a daily basis. And I think as you're thinking about what you want to do in your lives, I think turning to those areas where like things that you really enjoy doing that you can then translate into a potential career, I would think about, because it's going to make your work life a lot more pleasant if you truly enjoy what you're working for.
Oh, challenges. These last 2 years have been an enormous challenge for our team. I mean, events have kind of been a whole new world. And I think ultimately the greatest challenge we faced is how do we experience things? How do we engage with each other? And there's no answer. So I think a lot of what I learned this year and a lot of the challenges that my team faced was reinventing, figuring stuff out in real time, and waking up every morning and realizing, I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know how we're going to get from point A to point B, but we'll figure it out. And so collaboration is the number one way that I've been able to face these challenges and be able to talk to people. What are you looking for? What do you want? And being able to build things for people based on what I know I needed and what I knew they needed. But evolution is the number one thing. And, you know, as far as challenges go, it's recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and that's okay. You might not know what you want to do today, and that's okay. Like, I went to school for something and found my journey, but you don't need to know where you're going to end up now. That's like a really, really important point. Sorry, I'm like choked up. Yeah, I mean, I just produced an event that was the greatest challenge of my career, where everything we knew, we've been doing this event for 8 years, and everything we knew about how this event worked, we had to completely scrap. We had to start completely over. And we didn't know if it was going to work, but we tried, and we worked our hearts out to make sure that people came, people enjoyed, and it was a huge success, but we had to just take a risk.
And she killed it with the event. Tara is just a superstar and very hardworking. Challenges. So I'm on the advertising sales side. So what I do is help the company make revenue. So we work with our advertising partners, a whole suite of different types of brands that you guys see out there, you know, from tech companies to products that you buy at Walgreens. So that challenge is definitely ever present every day, where as a client partner, I'm talking and pitching and presenting the things, the brand stories that Abby and the marketing team are putting together, recapping all the amazing things that happened at Vulture Fest with the experiential team, and really going out and market and talking to a ton of clients and sharing the Vox Media story and talking to them and figuring out what solutions we can bring to them to drive awareness and engage with our audience. So that's pretty broad, but then when it comes to each individual client, you have to really create a unique story to tell them why, you know, working with us is beneficial, what we bring to the table, and then kind of negotiating and talking back and forth with them to figure out exactly what program makes the most sense for them. So that's being in sales. That's a challenge that I accept as a salesperson. That is the job, and I really like that. That's thriving on change. That's really evolution every day. You can never prepare for what a client's going to ask you. You can never anticipate too much. So staying on your toes is always a challenge, but I think the thing every day is figuring out that unique story and talking to the clients in a way that they'll listen, they'll be open to understanding, okay, yeah, they would be a good partner. So really problem solving every day is the challenge. But as a salesperson, it's something that I enjoy, and I uniquely thrive on it. Not everyone loves that, but I love the challenge, and I love, you know, have a little bit of a competitive nature in myself too. So that gets me going. So it's a challenge that I accept, that I like, but it's a part of the job that I really enjoy.
Okay, so obviously Tara had said about how events have been very wishy-washy during the pandemic. So I had recently joined the team, so I commend the experiential team when I wasn't there for coming up with these amazing digital and hybrid events. But coming in right now, as like we're starting to finally do in-person events, I think for me it's just biggest challenge is knowing how to be as creative as possible with this. Like, I feel like sometimes I doubt myself and I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say something. But my biggest recommendation is you should always put an idea out there, because nothing could ever go wrong with just putting yourself out there. Because we did a little bit of brainstorming for Vulture. We did a little brainstorming for Code Conference that we just had, and some of those stuck. So yeah, biggest challenge is maybe like doubting yourself in the industry because you might be young or you don't think that your idea can make any sense, but it does. So it's just worth it to just say what's on your mind, and it can stick.
So none of us are journalists. I mean, we work for a media company, but we represent journalism. And I think what a lot of you probably hear about is who gets to tell the story? Who is allowed to write about something now? And that's something that we face at Vox Media. Now, while we're not journalists, like Abby often has to think about how does she present materials to people and how do we talk about it? So I'm going to ask her about how she thinks about diversity, how she thinks about talking about our brands, and how we tell our story so we're representing the people who are writing about it correctly.
It's been especially challenging, and I think there was a much needed reckoning in the industry of media and in many other industries in the last 2 years about diversity in storytelling. And one of the things that I think we do well, and one of the ways that we talk about storytelling at Vox Media is that we have a really robust insights and innovation team, and they talk to our audience on an ongoing basis, and they survey our audience on, really anything from like what products are you buying at Walgreens, products that Charlie's advertisers are promoting, to how they think about what phone they're going to buy next, to much more serious issues like, what are their thoughts on athletes also being social activists? How comfortable is our audience advocating for social change in their private life, which is something that most media companies, I can tell you, do not do. So what came back, which was not really a surprise, but was very gratifying to hear, was that the audience for all of our websites and our magazine are much more attuned to what's going on in the news cycle, are much more interested in issues of diversity and equity and inclusivity. One of the big criticisms of media sometimes is that, well, that's great, but all of your readers must be in New York and LA. And we can say that is absolutely not the case, and that the prevailing media narrative of like coastal elites, driving what's in the media is actually pretty false, that there are people all over this country who care about diverse storytelling and who want to see different types of stories written about in the media. So that's been one of the sort of guiding forces for my team, is to look at how our audiences are responding to our content and like what kind of content they want to see more about. And resoundingly, it's more diverse content, more inclusive content, like stories from different types of creators help us understand like this very difficult world moment that we're having right now, which, properties like Vox and New York Mag do really well.
You have to address the same thing, but from an event standpoint. How do you think about when you're putting together an event and panels, how do you think about diversity and inclusion and what voices to include?
I think for our team, the number one aspect that I focus on a lot is that diversity means a lot of things. And so when we're producing an event and when we're thinking about this stuff in terms of not only what's going to resonate with our audience, as Abby was saying, which is a huge aspect of what we're doing. We're looking at our audience, we're looking at the type of event we're doing, and we're trying to figure out what's going to resonate with them. But it's also an opportunity, and I take it really seriously as far as Vox Media's ability to tap into our the fact that we can not only impact the conversation, but we can start a conversation. We could change the conversation. And our scale and our reach and our diverse platforms that we have in order to tell stories give us the opportunity to put people on that platform that might not otherwise have a microphone or might not otherwise have an opportunity to show their experience, their creative engines and sort of what makes them thrive. And that's not just as far as like panel goes. A panel is a great opportunity for us to take a dynamic conversation, and a dynamic conversation only happens when you have people from different backgrounds with different experiences and different perspective that they can bring. But that's true with every type of experience. So letting other people have an opportunity to talk, to give them the microphone when they can, and that's what I'm about to do because I want to hear from you guys. But I think that that's a huge aspect of it, is knowing when to be quiet to give somebody else the opportunity to have an idea, and to let them shine.
Do you want, oh, okay. Diversity, inclusion, and just, sorry, I'm like, remind me the question again.
No. We have, things that we do at Vox Media that are kind of interesting. We have a lot of journalists who have been writing for years, and as language evolves and as things change, they really need to keep up with it and really need to understand and put their finger on the pulse of what's going on. So we have this program called Language Please, which is all of our journalists come up with standards and talk about how do they refer to gender norms now? How do they refer to people who've transitioned? How do they refer to bodies of work that may have been written as one gender but now are written as another? How do they talk about social justice using the right terminology? So that is something that's super important and that our company has invested in and is actually sharing across the board and getting best practices and coming up with different boards of people to understand like how we need to evolve. If media doesn't evolve, you become irrelevant. We need to be relevant for your generation, as well as the current millennials, Gen Xers. So you'll see a lot of that is evolving. And I think what I want to ask Charlene is, she deals with a lot of the tech companies and how our message and how our platform and how our content needs to change based on what she gets asked for from those platforms. So I'd love to hear that from you.
I think I'm sure everyone here, who watches TikTok, who's on Instagram, et cetera, but on the editorial side, our journalisms are creating amazing work, storytelling, all the things that they do so well. I am not a journalist because I am just not a good writer, but I can sell. So yeah, but working with these platforms, there's two sides of the business, right? Advertising, working with them to work with us and advertise the Google Pixel phone that just launched. But these platforms also are tools that enable our journalists to create and tell stories that will engage with you on those platforms, on Instagram versus TikTok, right? If you consume those platforms, they're pretty different, and the types of videos, short form to long form, vary. You're watching YouTube, that's a different experience than TikTok. So a lot of the analytics you can get working with these platforms are kind of it's the data that our editorial team will take in and look at. Okay, this story about social change really engaged people because we did a video on TikTok short form and it was really engaging in that way. But then we told a longer story more in depth through our explainer video on YouTube, right? So they're two different platforms. You go on them for different purposes as a consumer. So our editorial team is taking those insights and really looking at, okay, how do we then produce the next video on YouTube to then get people to watch and understand this topic? So there's a lot of that analysis behind the scenes. So as a consumer, you don't see any of that. You just get the story and you engage with it. But your engagement really helps power editorial. And I think that's, as a consumer back in the day, not working in media, realizing the depth of strategic things that these journalists will do to make sure that the story gets out there in an authentic way, but also in an engaging way. So the engagement piece is really, really fascinating. And if anyone does love data, that is a whole other side of the business as well.
Yeah, I think about, if you're going into journalism today or you're going into media, there's so many different avenues. There's YouTube, there's TikTok, there's everything that you use now to communicate or to get content is just going to explode even more. There's going to be platforms that none of us have even thought about. So my general advice, if you're going to a career with media, embrace change, love change, because it's just constantly, you need to rethink your job, you need to rethink about how you present materials, but it also makes it super exciting, and you're often on the cutting edge of looking at these platforms and looking at these new ways to communicate and figuring it out. And there's no one right answer. And there's people who've been working for years who have a great idea for TikTok, and all of a sudden it's a hit. There's people who've never worked in media before who come to us with an idea, and it can be a hit. So I would say don't look at a career in media as having one path. It can have multiple paths, as we've all talked about, and it can have multiple expressions, which is the really fun part of the job. I think I'm going to open it up to questions now from the audience, and you can ask any of us or you can ask all of us. So does anybody have any particular questions?
I have a quick question. I think something that you all collectively mentioned was how your passion is now like at the forefront of your career and you're able to incorporate that in your everyday life. But after college and when you're looking for jobs, even, a couple years, how practical is it to actually have your passion be included in your job? And if it's not in your job right away, like how are you able to incorporate your passion and do something that you really love?
I'm going to let everybody answer this because this comes up in all of our conversations we have with our teams. We do something called quarterly conversations. And I often hear people say, I want to be able to express my more creative side. I want to be able to express, do more of this and less of this. And what I tell everybody is, nurture that passion. Make sure that your bosses know about it. Make sure that future employers know about it. Right off the bat, you may have to learn a certain skill set, and that's okay. And you may have to learn background, but you will always, if you have a good boss, if you're driving your career in a certain way, you will always find someone who sees that passion in you and is going to say, yeah, I can help you get there. This is going to explode. This is a great, great expression of what we need from people. So follow your passions.
I would say just listen to your intuition, even starting now. Like, what are the classes that you really like? What are the classes that don't feel like work because you actually find that you enjoy some parts of them? And then I would try to follow that thread or follow those same threads that you encounter in high school, in college, and then even in your first job, which, yeah, it might not be your dream job. But as long as there's like a thread present of one of those things that really elevates you, that uplifts you, then there's a good chance that you'll be able to like maintain happiness in your career. The other thing I would encourage is like always strive to have a life outside of your job. Even if it's difficult to make time for it, it feels like, life is really overwhelming when you first graduate from college and you're on your own and like you have to pay your bills and all this stuff. But you have to make time to do something, even if it's an hour a week of a passion project, because that's what's going to sustain you through those, sometimes difficult years right after college where you're in an entry-level job. It's not speaking to your full passions, but, just keep an eye on and an ear and like listen to like what really drives you and like what gives you passion in life, and try to keep that alive even in times when it seems difficult.
I would add to that, also bring that outside stuff you do to your job, because you'll be surprised how people will pick up on that. So if you have a passion outside the job that may be not related, bring it into your job. Tell people about it.
I think the number one advice I would give you is keep your people close. Talk to each other, inspire each other. Find people in your life who drive you and who you can relate to, but also be inspired by. Because those are the people ultimately who pushed me and who will push you to do something different, to take those risks, to really engage your passions, and to recognize, as Jackie said, that there are careers that you might not even realize are careers, but you can find your way there. And sometimes that path is really, my path was really confusing for a long time. And then on paper, when I did my resume for, this job, it was like, there is something here that absolutely makes sense. But at the time, I felt like I was bouncing around like crazy and not necessarily on a straight path. But what ultimately I realized is that my skill set and what I care most about is experiences, and making sure that I have the ability not only to create experiences, But what really drives me, and maybe it's, deep in my roots, is being able to enjoy other people experiencing is what drives me personally. And so recognizing that there are a lot of different ways that can happen, but if I'm around people who inspire me and I'm around people who I can collaborate with, and people who mentor me as well, I think, having a really solid mentor and having people around you who are above you, whether that's a boss or a friend or anyone else that you can rely on. Sometimes your teachers here can be that person for you, sometimes each other can. So just keep your eyes open to the people and the feelings, as Abby said, that you're like, oh, this feels good. Like, I want more of that.
Yes, 100% mentorship, I think, is a huge critical piece, and it can manifest in whoever, anyone that you feel like, hey, this is a person that can have my back, I can bounce ideas off of. My advice always for people who are coming out of college is very similar to all the things you guys have said, for sure, resonate with this. But I also like to just emphasize, know what you don't want, like, period. Because in my career, you can just shave that off as you're evolving. Business is always evolving. Companies are evolving. We are all evolving. So if you know, like, hey, I tried this, first you want to try something, and then if you don't like it, an aspect of it, for example, you might like certain elements of a job, but there's one or two things that you're like, you know what, this isn't a fit for me, this isn't fulfilling for me. That helps you naturally guide you to places, the threads that Abby's talking about, where it's like, I do like being more creative. I do like telling a story through marketing or whatever it is. So it will just naturally guide you to, make a list of places that you're like, I tried it wasn't maybe my top thing that I love, but I also gained that experience, which is actually really important to take into a career, because it kind of, again, different perspectives. You tried something and now you can actually resonate with somebody who does work in events. You tried it and you're like, you know what? That's why I applaud Tara, because she crushes that, but that's not my top passion. So that helps you prioritize, and that also goes back to the intuition piece, because sometimes it is really hard to listen to your intuition, especially when you're starting your career, because you don't know everything, but just know what you don't want and take that along as you evolve in your career. And sometimes when you're doubting yourself or just not sure, that's where the mentorship comes through. And my experience was 100%, and still women talking to women and just giving advice, hearing their story, how did they navigate through challenging times, all of that stuff. And the last thing I would say is just be an open person and want to try everything. Like, especially when you're starting out your career, again, to Tara's point, you don't know everything that's out there. There's a lot of jobs that in college, it's not like there's like a huge directory. It's like, here are all the jobs in the world that you can have. A lot of it is real-time experience. So be open, be a sponge, be wanting to learn, and that'll help guide you to where you don't want your passions to lie and where you do want your passions to lie.
First off, you guys are giving wonderful advice for someone who just graduated in May. So you guys are really, I'm taking this to heart. But as a perspective of someone who did just graduate college and is still very young, still very bright in the industry, is that you don't need to know your passion, especially at your age. When I was like 16 or 17, I really thought I was going to be like something, and then now I'm in events, I'm in media, and I thought I was going to be an accountant, I thought I was going to be in finance. Things change, especially during college, so I highly recommend going in undecided and trying to figure out what take your gen eds. But it's just being able to have a mentor in the industry, because I knew Jackie for 4 or 5 years. I've known her my whole life, but I've been in connections with her, and especially during the pandemic when I really thought that me and my friends and all of us couldn't get jobs because there was nothing. I stayed in touch with Jackie, and she has been my mentor through everything, and she was the one who introduced me, hey, I think you'd be really good at media, and not even just media, this specific part in media. I didn't know this job existed. You're never going to know what job exists unless you ask. So just be able to have these connections, be open, and just don't think that you have to decide on what your life is at 17 years old. Because I know, I'm still doing it. I'm like, you don't have to decide right now, but just be open and at least look up to your peers, look up to your professors, make your connections. Yeah.
And never be afraid to fail. Learn from the failures, learn for things that don't go perfectly, but don't be afraid. Don't let that stop you, the fear of failure, from doing something and from really diving into it. Any other questions?
I had a question for Tara. I wanted to know what it was like transitioning from a media arts degree to very creative to more commercial employment, and what opportunities and steps you took, because I wanted to know if those two fields were entirely different or if there were similarities, and if you still incorporate more creative outlets into what you do now. Thanks.
Yes, I absolutely. I think ultimately what I will note is that the skills that you learn are transferable. And I know that that sounds so obvious, but like it's absolutely true. So learning communication, learning even business sense, and knowing how to take something that is a creative field and how do you make money doing that? Like that ultimately is what we all spend a lot of time thinking about, is like, this is really cool. Like we have a weekly comedy show that we produce, and it's not because this is going to like pay all the bills at Vox Media. It's because we like it, we care about it. Vulture really has a passion for it. It drives content. So trying to find those steps along the way, as you said, and recognizing that those steps aren't necessarily black and white. Those steps aren't necessarily building blocks. Those steps are ultimately the way that you can build your skills and your abilities to know how to navigate that unknown path in the end. And so, you know, my direct experience, I would never say these are the steps you need to take to get to my career, because it's my experience. Your experience is going to be yours. And so find the steps that you need to take to ultimately continue to feel fulfilled and to continue to feel passionate, but recognize when things, as you said, are not working and it's time to move on. I went to school for what I thought, I didn't even know that loving TV meant that you could have a job making TV shows. Like, that's crazy to me that was a possibility. But then when I started doing it, and this is, really real talk, when I first graduated, I went into music video production, and I realized that I was at an interesting time in that path where the budgets that we had initially when I started to plummet, because film, which was a very expensive medium, then moved to video. And the digital format meant that we had to pivot, and things were way cheaper, and so the budgets were way cheaper, and it wasn't sustainable. So I had to find something else to do, and I had no idea what that was going to be. So I took in my entrepreneurial spirit and I said, all right, let's try something else. And that's how I found events. It was like, we build short things and we break them down immediately and their experiences. And so ultimately, I had no idea that was going to be my path. And I think that that's important, is just, as you said, being open to opportunity and passion. And sometimes that struggle is what I found was a little bit of that fire in me of like, all right, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to make this happen? I've got to get out there and I've got to figure something out. And who do I know who can help me?
I have a question for Charlene, but of course anybody else can answer as well. But I was wondering how you realized business and marketing was your passion, if there were any obstacles you faced as a woman in business.
How did I figure out business? So I actually started in college as an interior design major, because I think we're all creative and we're all business-minded women as well, so we both have both sides of that. So I thought I wanted to do something more creative. And then after freshman year, I was like, you know what? I couldn't imagine. I love it so much. I was so passionate about it that I actually was like, I don't want this to be my job, because I want it to be my passion on the side, right? So there's different ways you can categorize your passion. So I kind of just naturally realized that going through the major and going through the classes. I was like, I really love this, but it's more fun for me than I think like I'm going to make a career out of it. So I fell into business, and I think a lot of how I discovered why this is where I need to land is just the characteristics of it and what vibes with me and my personality. And also, peers and people can validate that for you because they know you, but it was like, I love talking to people. I love networking. I love kind of the marketing side where we get to put a story together and present it, put a whole thing together. Really kind of the nuts and bolts of sales and business were the characteristics of what I liked. And then career-wise, I was like, yeah, I could see this doing. And because business is so general that you can have these characteristics in any industry. It could be the airline industry, it could be TV, it could be anything. So kind of that foundation of skills is just where I always kind of really thrived in. So I kind of broke it down that way. And then the challenges faced as a woman, I mean, unfortunately, the answer is yes. We hope that that answer changes for every generation. But I think, how do you overcome it? To be honest, you overcome it by being surrounded by powerful, amazing women, because you have your people where, any of you, I'm sure your friends really help lift you up and encourage you to stand up for yourself, to face that challenge and to take it on. So yes, as a businesswoman, you will face challenges, whatever they are. Challenges as a woman, definitely, but I think that support system and having women who empower you and vice versa is really, to be honest, like when you're having a really hard day and you're just facing challenges, like the people I text are always my sister, my mom, and then my best friends, because it's just people are going to help you, encourage you to, even if you faced it yourself, you have your support system. But yeah, I think facing those challenges, you're going to just have to be very vocal. I think that's your generation is already very much progressive in that way as females, and I think that's just going to continue. You just have to stand up for yourself. It's easier said than done, for sure. You have to have those cheerleaders behind you, but yeah, it's something that also once you overcome it and you stand up for yourself, it feels really, really great. So then you're like, pat on the back, I can do this, and then you move on. So I think it's just all about encouragement and support.
Thank you so much for having us. And please stay connected with us. All these women here are here because they are, excited about working with you, answering any questions. So please reach out to us. Eva has our information, so we're happy to continue the conversation.